useful to me. I have a limited number of books that I'll have on my library shelves. I have a certain amount of space for my stash. And, if there's more than that amount of stash, then I sure need to step up my pace in making more quilts.
Yeah.
So for me personally, it isn't so much that I think that I can do something to ameliorate the toxic cost of either cotton growing or printing or the shipping of the cotton and the created fabric back and forth or all those things. There's cost to it, but I need to, in my effort, need to try to make the benefit of it at least be as much as the cost. And I would like people to do that.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Tell me also about, we'll see how this goes. So one of the things that's interesting is that you also seem to be interested in quilt history. We've interviewed Barbara Brackman. We haven't aired that one yet. And we're really interested in quilt study and historians and quilts, and you have some links to that. So I'm curious about that part of your life too. How important do you think is like the historical and you use traditional blocks? I imagine that's important as part of. I mean, your stuff is really contemporary and interesting. And traditional too, but you do seem to tell me about the Quilt Index and the International Studies Center and all that, and Barbara Brackman. How important is it to look to these foundational texts for part of your quilting?
I use them as inspiration primarily, but I also find that understanding the past is a good way to appreciate those who come before us.
Yeah.
And so for me, that means that, one of the lectures that I sometimes do for guilds is on the mill girls, the New England textile was in the early 1800s.
Right.
And seeing what part that they have in where we are today helps me to appreciate what we are doing today even more. And then, of course, we can't disentangle what they did from what was happening in the South at the same time.
Yeah.
And, the slavery and the impact of that. One of the stories that I've commented on, I've written about a couple of different times and ways is the Underground Railroad Quilt Code.
So for those, So for those that don't understand, explain to us what the Underground Railroad Code is and what's going on there, because it's kind of interesting and it's a bit of a mess because some people think it was and others aren't, and people are really hyper opinionated about this, right?
I certainly am.
Yeah.
I have a hyper opinion about it, but the notion of the Underground Railroad Quilt Code is that there was a book that came out in the late 90s called Hidden in Plain View. And the book was based on stories that were told by a woman named Ozella Williams. And she was, I believe, a quilt vendor at a farmer's market in Georgia. The book's author met her and listened to some of her stories. And the stories were about a family tradition, an oral tradition in this woman's family that supposedly was told about quilts being used to help guide slaves through the Underground Railroad to escape to the north. And so that's the basic idea of it. Quilts, in particular quilt patterns, quilt blocks were used for that purpose.
Right, that they had meaning, that a certain block would mean something so that the fugitive slaves could escape without getting caught. Is that kind of the narrative of it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's the idea. And when that book came out, I think there was a lot of excitement, both within the textile world as well as in, pre-Civil War historians,
right,
who looked into that and really found that there was no real good evidence of it. So the oral tradition continues, and people who have been entranced by the idea of it have used the idea within fictional books and movies, and that has spread the idea farther. And so now we're pretty much to the point where we have Betsy Ross's flag or George Washington's cherry tree that are these lovely American myths, but they really don't hold up to historical scrutiny.
That's really interesting.
So I told you that my background's very analytical. So
right.
Looking at this as somebody who respects hard research, there's just the research has not shown that this actually happened. Of course, we can't say that it didn't happen.
Right.
We don't know that fact, but there isn't evidence that it did.
It's so interesting. And then, isn't there a state that had a whole Underground Railroad thing? Didn't they do? Isn't that something? Somebody posted about that recently. That there was a exhibit of, and they recreate right. So, and then
that was.
Yeah, is that you?
That was
that?
A few miles east of here on Highway Interstate 80 is a rest area, and the rest area is themed with the supposed Underground Railroad quilt code blocks that were used.
So interesting, right? All right, so that's interesting, right? So now we have history. I mean, it's all the whole fake news stuff, but on a different level, right? So the stories are if that's true, right? So now you've got government-sponsored rest stops talking about underground quilting, which is really interesting. Yeah. Then we've also got here. We've got someone here that is very serious about her belief that it did occur, and that she feels like she remembers people talking about it in her childhood, and that this was a thing. That it wasn't quilt things, but it was flags, different color flags that going up through Louisiana. And she gets very upset about people who say that it didn't exist, because she feels like that it did, and that she feels like everyone's against, not against her, but that why. So I find it really, because I'm a historian by training and I haven't looked into this at all, but as you said, it's very interesting. It's a myth. I mean, I guess that's how things get started, right? You think about all the fables and the stories of our world, and this is one of them, and it may be in truth or it may not be. It's so fascinating. So, and you find that people want you to come do that lecture? Do you find that's an interesting thing for you? You're on the guild circuit, right? You've got, you tell me a little bit about what that's like.
I really love presenting to guilds. Part of my background is also in teaching financial management, and of course, when I worked as an investment manager, also I did a lot of teaching with my clients in different ways, and so the teaching comes pretty naturally to me, and it's just a lot of fun. But going to different guilds and doing presentations on medallion quilts or on the Underground Railroad quilt code, or on the Mill Girls, those are just fun things to do. What else would you like to know about that?
Well, what do you think, I was just talking to someone else in the hour before, of what role do you think that the guilds play in terms of, how important are the guilds in terms of the quilt ecosystem? What role do you think the fact that you go to guilds and they pay you a fee to lecture, and that, all these, this is a huge part of the world. What role does that play, do you think, in the quilting experience or the economy of quilting?
I'm really not sure about that, because I know quilters who do belong to guilds, and I know quilters who don't. So I don't have a good sense for what's the proportion. I expect that some of the surveys that have been done probably speak to that, but I don't know what those numbers are. Do you think
it's do you find it important? Why do you, you like doing it, but why, when you go to guilds, why do you think they're having, tell me more about your insight into sort of the guild thing. Are they, I don't know.
I think that people join guild because it's nice to have people around you who share your interest. And even if Marjorie makes different types of quilts than you make, then it's still fun to see what Marjorie makes and talk with her about what colors is she going to choose, or show and tell is usually the best part of every guild meeting.
Yeah, it is great.
To see what people have made or what they're working on, and you get to know people a bit by what they have to say when they show their quilts.
Yeah.
My guild is mostly women who are older than I am, and they're making quilts for grandchildren and great grandchildren and great nieces and wedding presents and baby gifts and things like that for the most part. But then there's also, for instance, Jill Fisher, who is amazing and would be another great person for you to talk to. And she's a young woman in our guild and does just the most amazing stuff. I'll have to give you a link to her.
I like that. That'd be great. That's really interesting.
And so when she comes up and she shows what she's made and has a small story with it, as she almost always does, it's, you get such great insight into her as a person, as being a distinct and separate person from the one who came up before her.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely community thing. Some people have, I think most of us who are happy in our lives have some community, and that's one of the ways that we get that.
Yeah, that's so true. Really interesting. We're going to try to do some more on guilds this summer because I'm really curious about that part of the ecosystem. All right, I got a few more things to ask you. We're halfway. We're at 30 minutes. So you use EQ7? Do you use a computer program to design your quilts?
I have EQ7 and I've just upgraded to 8. And I don't usually start with the design software for making a quilt, but lots of times after I've gotten, say, the center block done and a couple of borders, and then it's starting to get to be kind of a big thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's easier to make the mistakes in the software. It's less time consuming and less expensive from a fabric usage standpoint.
That's really interesting.
If I make design mistakes of the software. So I typically will go to the software if I'm going to use it at all, something like halfway through.
Interesting.
And go from.
So in case people don't know what it is, tell us what EQ7 is and how hard is it to use?
Well, EQ is electric quilt, and 7 is the 7th version, and 8 is their newest version. And so EQ7 and 8 is design software for quilting. I don't use it very extensively from the standpoint of all the different functions. I mean, it has got way more functionality than I will ever use. So I'm not the expert to talk to, and you surely should speak with someone who does that. But it is there is a library of blocks that you can use, or you can design your own. There's a library of fabrics that you can use, or you can import your own. And so it's a drawing program in essence that you can use to show what a quilt will look like.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it is. It's really neat.
That's really cool. Well, I think I played with it a long time ago, like probably EQ1 or something. But it would be really interesting to see. I think, is that the one that Barbara Brackman's, that they have her library in so Barbara Brackman collected all of those, just so people don't know, Barbara Brackman is a historian. She collected in the 70s. She went through all of these, we'll put that, maybe we'll put this, that interview out with your interview. All the blocks, went through magazines and all kinds of spaces to find, and she's created this resource, like encyclopedia of blocks. And then I think it's EQ7, but it could be another one where they took them and imported all of her work into that. I'm not sure if it's that one, but it is a software program that her blocks are in now.
I actually think it's a different one.
You think it's a different one?
I don't think.
You don't think it's EQ7? That's interesting. You'll have to figure out all of that.
Yeah.
So I found that was interesting. Yeah. I'll be interested
to leave that to you to look that up. So.
Yeah, we'll have to sort of